The Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said to the Judeans who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Reformation Sunday strikes me a bit differently this year. And it's not just because this sanctuary isn't filled with the reverbing sound of a mighty fortress, but it feels different somehow. Now, every year we get the same texts for this day, and every year I'm drawn to the beautiful passage from Jeremiah above all the others. A new covenant, a God who lovingly takes God's people by the hand to lead them into freedom, total and complete forgiveness. But this beautiful passage doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes at a time of total devastation and ruin, uncertainty and questioning of God's presence. During the time when Jeremiah prophesied to God's people, things were chaotic, to say the least. The people had been conquered by a foreign empire, and the two most precious national institutions that they knew, the temple in Jerusalem and the monarchy, descended from King David, both of which had been destroyed. The places where they had come to expect God's promise and presence were gone. They thought they had it all figured out until they didn't. It was a time of loss and grief and uncertainty. Our namesake reformer, Martin Luther, knew something about uncertainty as well. As our presiding bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, has written in a recent column, Luther had been excommunicated by the church and declared an outlaw by the emperor. The bubonic plague had returned to Wittenberg, Germany. His 7-month-old daughter, Elizabeth, had died. Western Europe was under attack by the Ottoman Empire. Civil unrest resulted in the Peasants' War, which was brutally crushed by the nobility. Luther lived in uncertain times. And on top of all of that, Luther at the time could have had no idea how his theological movement would turn out. He would have no idea that we would be here today, 500 years later. At the time, infighting and even violence among his fellow reformers was pervasive, and even Luther himself struggled with lifelong doubts about his faithfulness to the word that he so vigorously defended. Uncertainty, worldwide plague, and divisive infighting and violence. That's our world today as much as it was Luther's world over 500 years ago. The virus is different, and the rival factions are different, and they fight over different things, but the deep uncertainty and fear is very much the same. In the midst of such uncertainty, Jeremiah prophesies to God's people a new covenant, a new promise, a new hope for the future, if ever God shows up with a word of hope where we least expect it, it's here. In the midst of destruction and hopelessness, we find these verses, part of Jeremiah's section aptly titled The Book of Consolation, a reminder of God's faithfulness and yearning to forgive and enduring presence, still showing up even and perhaps especially in the least expected places. And on his better days, Luther still knew this truth as well. A mighty fortress is our God resounds from the computer speakers of Lutheran homes everywhere this morning, echoing the psalmist's refrain as we heard a paraphrase of a little while ago. God is our refuge and strength. The God of Jacob is our refuge. The hope of the psalmist is the same hope of Jeremiah and the same hope that Luther clung to when all seemed so uncertain. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Now, it's interesting to me that the psalmist chooses that particular title to refer to God, the God of Jacob, not the God of Israel. Now, we know it's the same person, but before God changes his name, Jacob, who stole his brother Esau's birthright. Jacob, who physically wrestled with God. Jacob, who by no means was perfect. So the God of Jacob is the God of a cheater and a doubter, the God of an imperfect but a no less faithful follower. The God of Jacob is our refuge, the God of the imperfect, the God of the devastated, the God of the grieving, the God of the angry, the God of the uncertain. The God of Jacob is our refuge. In the midst of living through uncertainty, through eyes clouded with tears of grief, it can be difficult to perceive where God is, let alone where God is calling us next. When will we be able to worship together in person again in this space? When will we go back to some semblance of normalcy, to the way things were before? Honestly, I have no idea. No one does. And that makes me as sad and anxious as any of you. Reformation hits differently this year because in many ways we are witnessing it happening. We are in the midst of a kind of reformation right now. Over the past months, we have reformed our worship together. Our meetings and our faith formation opportunities, our service and our witness, our very identity of what it means to be a church in the world for the sake of the world. And even as we are reforming our life together, we trust that we too are being reformed by God's Spirit. As the hymn that we'll sing in a few moments reminds us, trust the goodness of creation. Trust the Spirit strong within. Dare to dream the vision promised, sprung from seed of what has been. Sing a new church into being. How is the Spirit calling us, shaping us, reforming us to be a church for these new times? People of God, we are the church of the Reformation. And the church of the Reformation is always being called forward, always being summoned by the God who made us, the God who is our refuge. That is a truth worth proclaiming this Reformation Sunday and every Sunday, a truth that sets us free. Because of the undeniable truth that the God of Jacob, the God of Jeremiah, the God of Luther and all the reformers, the God of all who live with uncertainty, is our refuge. We are set free to keep on being the church, to keep loving and serving God's people in the best way that we can, to care for ourselves when we need to come together as the people of God in new and creative ways, to sing a new church into being.